All right, it's 5:30, so I'll call the meeting to order. I'd like to first start by acknowledging that this meeting is respectfully held on the traditional territory of the Sikas First Nation, on whose land we live, work, and play. We have an agenda circulated. Would somebody like to move adoption? All in favor? It's carried. So we'll go straight to the first item, 4.1, which is the Van Hoof Economic Diversification Strategy. I will hand it over to you, Susan.
Great, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. So I'm Susan Mowbray. Clint, can you turn your?
I can hear.
Nope, you're here. We're hearing an echo. There we go. Perfect. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Or is this mine?
Oh, probably, yeah.
My mic is off. I thought I turned off. Cute. There. Technology is wonderful when it works. Sorry about that. So I'm Susan Mowbray. I lead M&P's Custom Research and Economics practice. And over the last year, we've had the pleasure of working with the district on their economic development strategy. So I'm really happy to be here tonight to talk a little bit about what we did and share our findings. I'm just going to share my screen. My colleague Clint, who worked with me on this, is going to be joining us. He's online virtually, so I want to begin by just acknowledging that this work was done on the traditional unceded territory of the Sikas First Nation, and that we're doing this presentation there as well. As I say, I'm Susan Mowbray, and my colleague Clint is the senior manager in our public sector consulting team, and I know he's met a number of you, and he was here doing a lot of the consultation during the development of this report. So I'll just start with just kind of giving a little bit of background and purpose of the strategy. And really, what the purpose of this project is to diversify the Van der Hoof economy and the regional economy with the intention of creating a more resilient community. And when we think about economic development and economic diversification, one of the things we need to think about is this is a long-term process. It's not like you do one 5-year strategy and you're done. So this is the first strategy, economic development strategy, that Van der Hoof has had that we're aware of. And so really the way that we've approached this was as setting the foundation over the next 5 years to guide economic development and diversification with the intention of creating a longer term, more resilient community. And how we went about doing that was to start with data informed. We wanted it to be data informed, and we wanted it to be community led so that it reflected the local context and created a set of practical and doable actions that the district and its partners could use to advance economic diversification over time. And how we did that was we started by really looking at what the data said that was available. And that was built around things like demographic information, the structure of the economy, information sort of on trends that are happening, as well as what's happening with the geopolitical situation, because that's affecting not just BC and Canada, but right down to the community level. The next thing we did was to do interviews. So we had a team of people come out for a few days in Van der Hoof and did a number of around 22 interviews with local residents and business owners just to understand what was happening on the ground. And we also conducted a community survey, and that was giving us that local perspective so that we understood what that data that we were seeing told us. So we collated all that and we brought it together into an economic summit that was held in September. There was 41 individuals that attended. I recognize some people from that meeting that are in this room today. And what we were doing with the economic summit was, first of all, we wanted the community to get the community to start talking about economic development and economic diversification. But we also wanted to get their perspectives on whether what we were seeing in the data and how we'd interpret it was consistent with, what their perspective was and if it made sense. And also to start to prioritize and think about what are some of those initiatives that could be put in place to help with economic diversification as we go forward. So then following the summit, we synthesized everything into the final report, worked with Scar and Will and the rest of the team at the district to finalize that and refine it and put it into the final report. So that was what we did. Now, what did we find? The first thing is really to understand what the current state in Van der Hoof is. And our approach to understanding the current state was really to look at sort of what that structure of the economy is today. And what we saw is that Vanderhoof is a service center for a larger region. And that has a couple of distinct advantages and some disadvantages for this situation. But what it really does is it means that there's a broad range of services here that you wouldn't expect to see in a community this size. So you have a better healthcare system than a typical community of this size because it is a regional service center for the surrounding communities. You also see that a lot of the services that are available here are related to the economic base. And so that economic base is really built around natural resources and some of those extractive industries that have historically been a big part of the northern economy. So forestry, mining, and agriculture. And those sectors right now are facing a number of challenges. Some of those are related to climate, some of them are related to the regulatory environment, and some of them are market conditions. And what it means is those sectors need to evolve. It doesn't mean those sectors are going to disappear. It just means that going forward, they're going to be different. And they're still going to play a big part in Vanderhoof's economy. And to think about it from the perspective of how can we build on the things that have been created to support those sectors to bring in other opportunities to diversify. So that's the first thing we found in the situational analysis. The second thing is that they're seeing a lot of demographic pressures. And these are demographic pressures that aren't just affecting Vanderhoof, but they're affecting BC more broadly and Canada. We have an aging population. And you're starting to see, the ratio of seniors to young people grow. That's called a dependency ratio. And what that means is the mix of services that are needed is going to change over time. So you're going to need more services to support seniors and not necessarily as many services to support young families, or those services aren't going to be growing as quickly. So that has implications for what the future workforce looks like and what the future infrastructure looks like. It also has implications for the labor market because what we're seeing is that as forestry and mining have kind of fallen off a bit, we're not seeing the same opportunities for young people in communities such as Vanderhoof and including Vanderhoof. And that means when people go away, they're going away to go to post-secondary, they're not necessarily coming back. And so if we look at the demographic trend in Vanderhoof over the last 5 to 10 years, what you see is more people 55 and above and kind of a stable working age population. So those younger people. And that is not projected to grow going forward. And that is a big risk to the labor force. And some of the things that we heard from employers was that they're having difficulty finding skilled workers. And what that means is that they can't grow. So that makes it hard for businesses to grow if they can't find skilled workers. And some of those areas where we're seeing those workforce gaps emerge are healthcare, trades, transportation, and early childhood education. I find early childhood education to be a really concerning one because that is where daycare is. And that is part of the workforce thing. If you don't have daycare available for families, that means women tend not to be able to participate in the labor force until the kids are older. So early childhood education is a sort of a red flag there for sort of being able to draw in that larger labor pool. We also saw a lot of, as I mentioned, some of the main sectors are being impacted by climate and market vulnerability. Things like wildfire, drought, commodity and trade uncertainty, which are impacting everybody. But there's also emerging opportunities. And those opportunities are around things like logistics, construction, tourism, and as we move to a more digital world. And then there's also the energy transition. So, that's kind of where things are right now when we did the study. There's been a big question mark over the whole thing because of what's happening with our geopolitical situation with the US administration, which has, created all that uncertainty. But many of the trends that we're seeing here were here before before the geopolitical situation. So we were already seeing forestry start to decline. We were seeing declines in like the agriculture sector. So these are sort of longer term trends that we're looking at, irrespective of what's happening at the geopolitical level. So when we're looking at economic development, we want to be building on strengths. So anytime you do an economic development strategy, you want to look at what are the assets and what are the strengths that you can use to build on. And so Vanderhoof's strengths are its location. It's a huge asset. You have a regional service hub which draws in people from all the surrounding communities for services. It's on Highway 16 and the CN Rail corridor. So those are some really big advantages for things like manufacturing, logistics, and construction. You also have a very strong community and recreational amenities and authentic local experiences. This really came out when we were doing the economic summit and the interviews, just that cohesiveness of the community. And that's a really good sign for successful economic development. Key assets from an economic perspective would be the livestock auction. That is a strength for the region. It's the only where people come to sell their cattle everywhere north of Kamloops. There's also post-secondary, so you have the ability to do training within the community through partnerships with CNC and UNBC. UNBC also does research around the agricultural space, which could be a huge potential. And the investment that was made in high-speed broadband can certainly is definitely an asset. I'd already talked a bit about that broad mix of local goods and services and the niche retail and hospitality. That's a strength. It draws people to Vanderhoof from other places, including from Prince George. So that's a way to bring people into the community. And you have an established supply chain for forestry and agriculture that can be used as a foundation for value-added services. So those are some of the key strengths that were identified that we used to build the initiatives around. In terms of some of the challenges, now many of these challenges are not unique to Vanderhoof. Many communities around BC and across Canada are facing some of the similar ones. Housing, we hear a lot about housing issues. Here you have limited diversity of housing and an aging housing stock. And this is creating constraints to workforce attraction and retention. So people can find maybe somebody who wants to move here, but they can't find a house for them to live. And that is a constraint on growth. There's also industrial and commercial land constraints. So service land is not necessarily available. We have the ALR, there's floodplain considerations. So land is certainly something that needs to be better understood and a strategy put in place around utilization. And then there's aging infrastructure where there's reinvestment needed. So water, roads, and different key sites and facilities. We also identified some capacity gaps. As I said, this is the first economic development strategy for Vanderhoof. And so some things that would typically be in place in the community have not been developed yet. One of those would be things like a land and building inventory. So when somebody is looking for land, you know what's available and you can kind of track availability and see how you can help free up land using various tools that are available to you. Another thing is just regular business engagement process. So understanding what the challenges that businesses are facing, what's working, what they're seeing on the ground can really help frame sort of policies and initiatives to both keep businesses in the community, but also attract new ones, because it's actually easier to grow an existing business than it is to attract a new business. So if you can grow your existing businesses, that is a very effective way to move forward. And then finally, the need to strengthen relationships with First Nations and work regionally with your regional partners to unlock opportunities, because Vanderhoof is very much integrated with the regional economy. Your labor force does not just reside within the community's boundaries, it actually stretches across the regional district. And so that's a very important thing to think about, and to think about how you can bring those things together. And so that was what we found. And in developing the strategy, the first thing is to think about what is the mission and vision that's going to guide economic development going forward. And so the vision was to create a stable, forward-thinking regional hub with a diversified economy where residents build careers, families establish roots, and businesses grow. This is something that's very consistent with where Vanderhoof is today, and is there's a really strong community. There are lots of opportunities here, and a lot of good things that the foundation can grow upon. And then the mission was to build economic diversity by nurturing and attracting businesses across multiple sectors, creating employment opportunities, and a sustainable tax base for growth. So those are sort of what the overarching themes that guide the development of the strategy. As I said earlier, diversification is a long-term process. And so the first 5 years really focuses on setting the foundations and launching priority initiatives so that 10, 15, 20 years from now, Vancouver will continue to be a resilient, thriving community. And we have some examples that we'll show you that inform this opinion towards the end. And so I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Clint now to sort of walk through the initiatives that we developed and there. So go ahead, Clint.
Great, thanks, Susan. Thanks for the great start to this. What I'm going to do is just highlight a few of the initiatives. I won't go through all of them, but just to talk to them. And also just to explain in terms of coming up with the initiatives, there were different ways that we slice these or different ways that we present them. And the slide that's in front of you right now is just showing you that there's three pillars to much of the work here. The first one is infrastructure and assets, really those things that are in place that can be built upon, that are key to success in the future. Then there's what we call the industry and business, where it's the actual business community that is in place in specific sectors and what this enables going forward. And then finally is the quality of life and placemaking. And what we saw this is that it's not just the infrastructure or the businesses in place, but it's also having a community that attracts people, a community that people want to live in, that has the amenities and the development that can sustain families and both residents and visitors. And as Susan went over, much of these, there already is a solid base. So for instance, in the quality of life, that was something that really stood out in the research. Many people brought this up as well. Going backwards with the business community, there's a lot of strength there too with the base that exists. And then finally, Susan mentioned much about the assets. So going forward, if you don't mind, Susan, to the next slide, is the way I present this here is in terms of priority initiatives. There are a few things here that are presented as foundations or at times quick wins that can be done. And this is thinking about in your year 1 to 2. And providing a few examples here. One is the development and maintenance of an industrial and light commercial land building inventory to match opportunities with sites. To explain this a little bit more is that, again, what we heard, what we found out through our research is that there is an interest in business development in Vanderhoof, but there's also at the same time either a perceived or real lack of sites for people to grow those businesses, whether it be from within the community or outside the community to looking to invest. And so the reason of this strategy itself is to be able to link those two sides. And first of all, to develop an inventory of what does exist within the community, both that can be land or land and building together, that could be for sale, could also be for lease or rent, to be able to utilize for different types of business potentials, whether this be within the energy sector, the mining sector, whether this be small scale or medium to large scale, or for industry or light industry or operational services. The idea here is to develop this and maintain the inventory to allow an access point for those seeking to come in and find ways to meet their needs. This is often something that's really typical, for instance, in the rental housing market, but is not as considered or put in place for the business or industrial sector. Also highlight another one, which is a business retention and expansion program. Now, Susan mentioned this in her comment that it's often much easier to retain what existing businesses exist as opposed to starting from scratch or recruiting businesses. So part of this strategy is building upon that, but also developing information that can be used to know what can be done and what should be done to support existing businesses. So a first part of this is to develop and conduct a survey with those businesses, to engage them, and to understand what is working, what more could be done to support businesses, where their impediments or barriers, where are their opportunities, which can change from year to year, that this is not something that's static. And to use this data then to develop specific programs on an annual basis. We see for this one, and as we develop, you'll see in our report, we do put further information in these, considering, for instance, financial resources that may be available. And we put where it might be a cost to this, but there also typically in these, there are potential opportunities and ways that we see that costs could be minimized. So for instance, this, and we were aware when we did our research in town that students were available within the district to help conduct something like this, to help conduct a survey, to help to be able to engage the community and identify specific needs or wants from the business community. Susan, I'll go to the next slide, please, and I'll highlight a few from this one. So the next one is expanding our time frame a little, that we go from those quick wins that are really year 1 to 2, that we expand it to about a 3-year horizon here. And to pick a few examples here, the first one be the potential of a major project is a logistics hub within the Vanderhoof area. And we position this as, first of all, a feasibility study, because within the scope of our research, we could only collect a certain amount of information, but the next step is taking that further. And we heard from many people, and also through our research, of the strategic location of Vanderhoof. You both have the CN rail line, but also Highway 16. And you also have lands within the region that are, for example, former industrial sites and rail sidings that form some of the ingredients necessary for an inland logistics hub. So we see potential in this from some of our research, but what we see as a next stage here is to conduct a feasibility study to determine if this is something Vanderhoof could develop and operate, and also seek financial support to do so for freight handling, storage, potentially custom programming, processing, potentially also cold storage. So part of this, this study would need to conduct further market, technical, and operational analysis, to conduct risk assessment and mitigation planning and sensitivity analysis on different scenarios, and then also actionable recommendations for this. The other one I thought I'd highlight within this one too is sorry, just one second, to further look at the potential of the former logging or forestry processing sites. And these industrial sites are within the community. They represent both an opportunity and something that still requires some work. So we see here as a strategy the potential to redevelop these sites. And this is something that through our research we found is being done elsewhere and also within the north of BC. There are some actions to overcome, or some key considerations that need to be overcome with these, including the fact that these sites do have remediation needs due to the contamination that are on the sites from long-term operation. But this is also something that where there is potential support from different channels for this type of work. And it's also something that is recognized by the government of British Columbia in terms of an area that is seen as a potential priority to unlock the potential of these type of sites. And as my previous, the previous one I brought up with regards to a logistic hub, does provide those potential opportunities when some of the infrastructure is already in place, such as access to rail, highways, but also some buildings that already exist on the site itself. I'll go on, Susan, to the last slide on the potential project here. And from here, we span out again a touch further, going years 2 to 5. And there's here a few ones that I'll highlight. And I'll start out with the one that's with regards to a regional housing infrastructure strategy. Now, we see this one as an extremely important one. As we heard, one of the constraints within the area are due to the lack of housing for further growth, for attracting certain types of people to the region or certain families to the region that may have more diverse needs than the housing stock that currently exists. Whether this be housing that's not just single family dwellings, but housing that is condos, whether it's multi-family type housing, or variations of this for different aspects of the population. And we see here that there's a potential to build on, first of all, the work that's already been done. So for instance, the Regional District of Baltimore has a strategic plan that has a strategic focus on housing supply. Vanderhoof did a housing needs assessment in 2020 and also developed an interim housing needs report in 2024. So we see here building on some of this work to develop a targeted strategy to address the different types of housing needs that would be needed in the area. And then also as a component of this, we see that it's important to consider such tools as modernizing both the regional and the municipal land taxation policy to encourage redevelopment and to disincentivize speculative landholding. We heard quite a bit during our interview and engagement process about efforts that have been made in the housing sector. And we also heard that sometimes the costs of housing are difficult to make the marketing or the investment decisions work. However, we see here also the potential to work together with various partners, not just the District of Vanderhoof, but the Regional District, the Union of British Columbia Municipalities, BC Housing, Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation, and also the Ministry of Housing and Municipal Affairs to work together on such a strategy. The other one I'd like to highlight for this category here is the idea of an experimental farm. Now, we bring this one up as something that builds on the agricultural base that is within the Vanderhoof area, but also builds on something that we'd heard from a lot of people and also through the research realized from UNBC that there is effects on the land due to climate change, and that will continue to be so over the years to come. And this can be seen as an opportunity where that might unlock potential gradually for different types of crops in the future, be it from an earlier to later growing season, be it to slight changes with regards to temperature and dynamics. But what we see here is the potential is for an experimental farm to experiment with these different types of crops, to be able to showcase what is potential in the region, and to link also research that is actively going, for instance, within UNBC or other universities, to join with this and to be able to try those different types of opportunities within the area. We see this as something that would then be an incubator for further work to develop the agricultural sector. I think, Susan, I'll stop there and just go, I don't know if I'll pass back to you for the next slide or if you want me to cover this one.
No, I can cover this one. Thank you, Clint. So I guess, so that's basically some of the high level strategies that are in there. The report actually lays out a roadmap. And the idea here is that the municipal district is the convener and brings groups together. It's not that every single strategy there is assigned for the district to do. It's to bring people together and bring different groups, because for any of these to be successful, you're going to need to have partners. Sometimes that's the Chamber of Commerce, sometimes that may be employers, sometimes that may be outside of the community to do it. And so those are all laid out in there. But really, in terms of implementing, the first thing to focus on is having those tools that are there in place. So the inventory of land, business retention and expansion, and partnership structures, because that is the foundation that you can use to build on everything else. The other thing to think about is what are the different roles for different groups in each of the strategies that you choose to go forward with. There's room for everybody. So in some cases, the district staff may lead it. In other cases, it might be your partnership with Secoos First Nation, where you're a supporting partner for something that they're doing. So really clarifying roles and responsibilities around each of the things that get pushed forward. And then to think about, there's a lot there. There's a lot of different initiatives, but to think about phasing the work over 5 years and just to review them annually and just see how progress is being made and be able to be flexible enough to adapt in some cases. So maybe with some of the big projects that are happening, having that logistics feasibility study done sooner might be better, given what's happening with some of those, the 5 major projects of national interest that are going to go right through your backyard. So keeping it flexible in that sense. And then also tracking progress using practical indicators. So things like if you're going with your business engagement, just keeping track of how many businesses are engaged, how many initiatives that came out of it, and whether businesses are feeling more positive over time as things go forward on it. And then also be reporting back to council periodically on progress and initiatives as it goes forward. And so those are sort of some of the best practices in terms of implementation of an economic development strategy. And just the other thing we wanted to talk a little bit about was just to give you some examples of where these kind of strategies have been successful, because that was part of what we looked at, was what has worked in other similar communities and how long did it take as we were putting this together. And one of the examples we looked at was Oregon. So Bend, Oregon used to be a forestry town, and then they kind of lost their forestry industry. And what happened was they had a focus on the manufacturing that was there for forestry, had vehicles. They pivoted towards recreational vehicles, so like dune buggies and things like that. And so they developed a manufacturing and a tourism economy, and a whole bunch of things have grown up around it. And so they have a venture conference there now. It's been going on for 22 years that attracts people, and they're building out a tech industry. And this took a long time. It took 25 years for this to do that. But it started with how can we pivot from forestry to do something with the assets that are there. And the community came together, and now 25 years later, they're developing a tech industry. Another example here is in Australia. They took a different strategy. They were very much a resource town, gold mine, and agricultural region. They completely pivoted away from that. So rather than building on what they had, they started to look at logistics hub. They looked at education. They looked at the knowledge economy. They looked at wineries, and they took their location, and it was all built around their central location and their university to build things out over time. Once again, this took a really long time to do. So it's not like this happens today, start to do some economic diversification today, and a year from now, the economy is diversified. It's a long-term process. And so to keep thinking about it as a long-term process involving partnerships is a really important part of it. And so I'm going to stop there and see if there's any questions for Clint Try about the strategy.
Any questions from council? Councilor Bowman.
Yeah, just one. You were mentioning that forestry and mining are in decline. That might be the case in all of BC, but in our local area, if you want pinpointed the mining here, we've got the Goldwater or the Blackwater gold mine. They're planning to expand, and then the nickel mine north of the fort is getting ready to come online. They're in their economic or in their environmental study stages now. So I don't know if mining's really taking a dive in our area. And one other thing too is that we do a business walk at least once a year, and the chamber's trying to up it to twice a year, where we go around. We're going to try and get more businesses in, but every year we go around and we're going to be making it twice a year, a spring one and a fall one. See how you did in the summer, how you did over the winter, that kind of thing. So we do that already, which I'm glad to see. And it's a great presentation. I really like the fact that you've highlighted the quality of life in our town, because I think that's a tremendous attraction. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and with mining is definitely, as logistics, is absolutely a huge opportunity for Vanderhoof. Unfortunately, right now, most of it's being supplied from the Lower Mainland, and so finding a way to work with the proponents to bring it here is a key thing.
Anybody else? Online, any questions? Good. Just had, to me, just a couple of comments. Like you use those two examples. Bend, Oregon is 100,000 people, yep, and Orange, Australia is 45,000. Yep. Do you think that's scalable down to look what they do?
I think the basic principles of what they did are the same principles that apply here. The scale might be different. So would you have a tech industry conference here? Probably not, but you could certainly take your existing base and figure out how can we take what's been built here already and pivot it to other sectors. So those are the things we were looking at when we looked at those areas. So it certainly is scalable. Sure, the things, whereas Orange took a different thing and just went totally away from their economic-based industries. So the path for Vanderhoof is probably a combination.
Sounds good. And just to point out, not to nitpick, but there was a economic diversification study in 2010. Before my time on council, I was the president of the chamber then, went through, but a lot of the amenities that you see in town now have come about since through that.
Excellent.
That was the starting ground for that.
So there is a starting point, and this builds on the starting point. So,
Good. Councilor Lozzie.
Okay, thank you, Susan and Clint. I would just like to make a motion. I appreciate the report and your presentation. We can't. Okay.
You can make a recommendation.
Okay.
Council to make a motion at
Can
the
I?
next regular meeting.
Can I? All right. I'd like to make a recommendation to council at our next meeting that we ask Dave Christie for some feedback on this report as well. Is that okay?
Dave's in the crowd. Couldn't we have a motion to ask him a question? Yeah, so we'll go back to that.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that?
Second.
All in favor? Dave, would you like to give us your opinion? Put Margaret's mic on? Yeah.
Good afternoon, Worship and Council. Great to be here. Dave Christie, Regional Manager with the Ministry of Jobs and Economic Growth. We were very excited when we heard Vanderhoof was starting this process. We supported the process through our Rural Economic Diversification and Infrastructure Program, essentially REDUP. Going through the report, working with Susan and Clint near the end of it, good foundation. There's some good stuff within the report. I think it's a solid foundation to move forward. Economic development in this area has been changing, it seems like, on a monthly basis. So there's definitely some things that, that were identified when the project was done that have evolved since then. I know Councillor Tom there had made mention about, well, since, this has been done, Blackwater Mine has been given permits for expansion. Centerra Gold Mount Milligan has been given permits for expansion, just in the mining piece of it. But I think you really nailed it on some of those key sectors around agriculture, around logistics. I think there's some real opportunities there, being on the main CN corridor. You hear what's happening in other parts of the province that are not on the CN corridor. So being on the corridor definitely opens up some opportunities. I think there's some other opportunities. The province has done a lot of work in the last year around investment attraction, investment readiness. I really appreciated, within the 1 to 2 years, Susan and Chris had mentioned, like investment readiness. Like that is key. We're noticing that in non-urban markets, communities are just not quite at that investment readiness yet. So I think that's a key point to pull out of this. And I know staff have been working really hard in the last 4 or 5 months to kind of really check that off. Another thing I really liked within the report was how you identified some skill gaps, some worker skill gaps. And I know the district, along with other community groups like Work BC, CNC, and some other partners in the province, in the last 8 weeks have really done some good work around what those gaps actually look like and what it looks like from the province to support some cohorts of training to help, close some of those gaps. And pretty much what you had identified in the report is what we kind of heard from employers and other major projects in the area. Other things that have kind of changed since the report was done is the province and the federal government has put out some kind of key priority sectors and economic development, industrial strategies. And for the most part, they are in alignment. But like I said, I mean, economic development in BC is evolving from our neighbor down south. So ag is one of those sectors that's been identified, critical minerals, it's been identified, energy, clean energy, it's been identified, and it's also been identified in the report. So, I think the report was quite well done. From the provincial side of things, we were kind of shoulder tapped near the very end to come in and support. I would have liked to have seen us maybe shoulder tapped a little bit sooner. And we could have possibly, provided a few more resources and data that we knew that was coming up to help support. But I think the report's a great foundation for Vanderhoof.
Steve. Mr. Bowman.
Can I ask what we have to do then for, you said smaller towns are not economically ready? The economic readiness, what is it we have to do to be economic ready?
Good question, Counselor. You're well on your way. You have an economic development officer that's dialed into what's going on, and that is the sole purpose, or not sole, but that is the purpose of their position. You have a vision from council about where kind of the community wants to go forward. That is two crucial steps in becoming investment ready. I know staff are working on, with the province, working on, updating the website a little bit, adding a few different things. There's been discussion around industrial land, workforce labor gaps and things like that. So the ball is rolling in the right direction already for Vanderhoof.
Councillor Frankel, did you have a hand up there?
At one time, I think it's all good. Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks for the report, Susan and Clint. I think we can all have these reports. Two things that we're not in control of is the geopolitical stuff that we're involved in now, and nobody can be in control of that. Tariffs, all of those avenues that they have to impose their might on not only Canada, not only British Columbia, but a small town of 4,500 where they don't care, is something that we have to consider. The other thing about people, they care, but there are governance policy, BC government policy and legislation, which it seems at first are very good and everybody votes unanimously for it, but hinders our economy. And I think we have to be aware of that, and the fact that, down here in Langley and Abbotsford in the Lower Mainland, people know nothing of the strifes that we face up north with our economies. They don't know about a sawmill. They don't know about a mine. They don't, all of those things. So we have to be aware that we as a community have to lobby even harder to get the ear of government, because the ear of government is in the Lower Mainland where there's 5 million people. So as much as we have a good report in front of us and some next steps, I don't know how you can ever idiot-proof yourself or a town against the United States and what they're trying to do, or Victoria painting the entire province with one brush in legislation. So.
Thanks, Councillor Frankel. Councillor Young.
Yeah, thank you for this report. I think that one thing that we've learned over the last 5 to 6 years is to really look around us locally and find out how we can really solidify and strengthen ourselves to get through these things. I think about the references to agriculture. How many times has agriculture we've been told it's dead in this community over the years, and I've got family in agriculture over the years. A lot of you, I look around, have had that. It has been up and down, and it's been that solid backbone for so long, along with forestry. And so there's pieces in this when I look at it where it says, don't abandon the natural resource, but add value to it. That's a key concept that popped out to me, where it's like, there's so many struggles, there's so many challenges that we face in all the natural resource sectors, but there's also new opportunities, and we can see how things change over time. You look at the mine that's near Fraser Lake that people have also said has been buried for so many years, and things keep popping back up there for different opportunities. So I'm not saying that that's going to go on forever, but I do like the idea of taking heed to, what Councillor Frankel's saying, but also that brings me back to what I said earlier, where we have to look at some of the things that we have. I'm glad to see the positives pointed out, because whenever we do these things, it's doom and gloom from a lot of folks from the outside. Oh, we can't do this and that in this town of Andrew, but we can. There's potential there to continue on, not give up on the things that's brought us here, but continue on down that path. So, and the other thing that I like about it, and I'm glad that Dave was able to add some more words to this, but the other piece that I really like is that idea of a plan. You know, we've come to the conclusion, a lot of these things that you've stated in this plan past, we agree with it because we've said a lot of these things, you've added to it. And the most valuable part, I think, is how are we going to move forward? How do we go for the next year, the 2 years, the 5 years, the 10 years? And that's the thing that's held us up over the years, in my opinion. Well, at least part of it, right? So it's another valuable piece that we can use to start charting forward course. So I don't know why I'm in such a positive mood tonight, but let's run that right now. So I just think there's a lot of things to be positive about. You know, we've been around for how many years now, Councillor Frankel, as a community? Not you, as
Oh,
a
yeah,
community.
longer than I have been.
Yeah,
around, but
1926 to 2026. So I think we still got a few more to go. Anyway,
I'm so glad you're turning over a new leaf, Councillor Young, and being more
well, you're not
positive.
here, so I'm more happy.
Turns out I need a mute button for the online part too, hey?
I just wonder if we should hear from our new economic development officer, what you thought of this plan, Sagar.
You're good.
No, I work closely with Susan and Clint and Will as well. So it came out as we wanted to see as well. And with working with Susan and Clint, it just like really solidified it professionally from their point of view and their research as well. The way it is structured in year 1 to 3 and year later, and that's what I think like would be really good for us to look at. As Councillor Young and Councillor Frankel also mentioned, like planned execution would be really critical for us to, and also what we have currently to retain and expand and also protect is really important at this point.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I just wanted to expand on that a little bit more with what Sagar said there. Really appreciate what's been brought forward. And as I've noted to council is that we're going to utilize this as kind of the first step when we meet in regards to having a strategic plan here within the next month or so. I wanted to have this framework in place so that we have some additional things to discuss, as well as work on the existing strategic plan that we have. So we're hoping to create a little bit of a framework for the new council that'll be coming in for next year, and being able to use this as some of the leveraging points that we'll be able to work on moving forward. So thank you very much for the work that you've done on this and kind of helping us to lay that out. And we brought in Sagar right at the right time in order to kind of mold it into exactly what we were looking for and needing. So really appreciate that.
I know it was absolutely our pleasure. We were delighted at the opportunity to work with the district here. I grew up in Northern BC, and it's always great to come back and especially to hear the positive things, because not everybody in the Lower Mainland thinks natural resources are bad. There are those of us down there that believe in them. Exactly. It's a beautiful place to be. Great.
Awesome. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much. I'll shut down.
Okay, before we move on to 4.2, I'll maybe just want to take the liberty to explain the process a little bit here. Tonight is a committee of the whole meeting. So this is the first time council really gets a chance to see a bylaw that's coming up and take a look at it. So we'll have a bit of a discussion around it tonight. After that, the district will meet with user groups to discuss it further, and then it will come back to council. So there's no readings tonight. This is very much a workshopping of a bill. So this will just be a discussion we have, and yeah, just we're all on the same page. Okay, airport regulation bylaw. Do you speak to it?
So this bylaw is brand new for the district. We've never had one before. It's been on staff's to-do list for a long, long time. Like other bylaws, we take bylaws from other communities and put them all together to fit our purposes, take out stuff we don't need, add stuff we do. So the communities I looked at were Chetwynd, Pemberton, Tofino, Ucluelet, and Powell River, as well as some larger airports. But it was mostly communities that were kind of had the same size airport, same use airport as we have. So it's kind of tough to find because we have Van Jam up there as well. So it's kind of a conglomeration of all those bylaws. So it's up for council discussion to go through it, and anything you don't like, you don't think's appropriate for us to remove, or to add anything you do think's appropriate.
Awesome. Thank you, Aline. So moving on, any comment from council? Council Frankel.
Yeah, thanks, your worship, and thanks, everybody. I think it's good to get something down on paper. We're putting a lot of money into the airport the last decade. I think it's a number in the millions, if not maybe $1.5 million or so, or more than that. But so I think we need to be able to, one thing that I didn't see in the previous report was the fact that the airport is an asset too. Maybe they had it in there and I missed it, but I do believe that the airport is an asset, and look at it now from where it was maybe a decade ago. So the only thing that I had in there, I did see we might have to grandfather some buildings. That would be some, we talk about Quonset huts, and we talked about, there was another terminology in there. I think the existing buildings might have to be, grandfathered, however that is, but anything future might follow this bylaw. And I would ask staff to give us an answer on how that would look, or whatever. But I think that if we can promote that a little bit more, and make sure that, rest assured to people that we're not really coming after the buildings or anything like that. I think it needs some cleanup. Honestly, I think the airport probably needs some cleanup, but maybe through this bylaw, we can add that or figure it out. So I'm glad we can get it out to the public and get some feedback on it. So thanks.
Go ahead.
So when bylaws are adopted, just like a zoning bylaw, anything that's already in existence becomes legal non-conforming, which is the other word for grandfathered. We can put a section in there, but that's just natural with bylaws. Any building that's currently in existence is fine. If it burns down more than 75% generally, then it has to be, it goes to the new bylaw. So anything there is fine as long as it doesn't lose 75% of it. But I can add a statement to that effect too, if it's better.
Okay. Any other comments?
We are taking this to the public. We are taking this to the public in a public setting, or
We'll be taking it to user groups.
to the user groups.
Yes.
Okay. And one at a time, or as a group session, or,
We'll determine that.
okay.
Everybody's good then?
It's in the next, well, it's a lot of people to round up to find a common time. Hopefully in the next 3 to 4, 5 weeks, as well, as
Yeah.
soon as we can get everybody together. So I have quite a list of people to invite. And then it will, if there are any changes that they suggest, then it will come back to council. So it could be a while for first reading.
Awesome.
Yeah. Everybody's good?
Yep.
Okay. Then I'll declare adjournment. Thank you.